automation, robots for developers.
Cool. So I'm Alfred, and the two gentlemen at the back, Louis and Darashi, we are the organizers of this meetup. So let's jump into our panel about funding IoT startups. So all three speakers on stage today are very familiar with how to fund IoT startups. So I just want to do a quick introduction. On the far side of the stage is Cyril. Yeah, it was like that. I will try. He is the venture partner of SOS Ventures, and also, as one of you has pointed out, the founder of Accelerator. Cyril is the most prolific investors in hardware space and has advised more than 40 companies such as Leap, Guitar, and Format. And in the middle is Rob Coney-Beer. Is that right? Coney-Beer. He's the managing director of Sashta Ventures. And Sashta Ventures is invested in the Internet of Things space with companies including Nest, Okada, and also Boolean. And closest to me is Kate Drain, and some of you have probably seen her in many other talks about Indiegogo. He is the hardware marketing director for Indiegogo, and Indiegogo has helped IoT startups such as Misfit Wearables, Scanadoos, Canonical to secure funding. So first of all, thank you so much for coming today, and we're very excited to have you guys coming to participate in this panel. So I'm going to start with a list of questions that we've put together, and we're going to have a Q&A afterwards. So if you have any questions, please kind of hold it until the end so we can have a conversation going first. So first question for you guys. About this connected space, connected devices, and as a IoT startup who is approaching investors, who is at a time where they want to start getting funding, what should they be factoring as they try to figure out how much capital to raise?
So I think one of the most important things to think about, I think most of the people in this room understand this, but a lot of people in Silicon Valley don't understand this, is when you ship a hardware product, it has to be perfect. And that's really hard for a lot of people that come from the software world to get their arms around. So when you're planning and you're thinking about milestones that you want to hit, to a certain extent, you have to throw away part of what you might learn if you come from the software world, which is around this idea of try fast and iterate and see what happens, because so much rides on having a perfect product. You can't go out and field upgrade it. You might be able to change the firmware, but if you change the firmware, you have to make sure that you set it up in a way that you can reliably change the firmware. So I think that's probably one of the most important things in terms of thinking about funding. That's more contextual. I mean, we can dive into it more if you like, but I'm sure you have a comment. Or Jim.
Sure. It's pretty great to hear that actually. Yeah, hardware and software are quite different. Yeah, finally, you know, what you have to think about is in terms of stages, whether you are from you know, your concept or whether you are into somewhat of a prototype, the functional prototype. Then when you're ready for central manufacturing, and then when you get to retail. So it's quite a long road from you know, point A to point B to point Z, and I think we'll probably dive into those stages a little later. But really, your capital need varies from stage to stage, and the people you are going to gather it from are very different. I guess, you know, the big question is always about VCs and, you know, venture money. But in hardware, it really happens quite later stage, unless you are, you know, one of the lucky few who have passed as a successful entrepreneur and are able to get, you know, $a few million just on the name. The VC stage really happens once the product, you know, is ready to hit the market and is on the growth curve, which isn't too different from you know, what VC is about. It's about growth at the moment.
Okay, I want to build up, like, just to build on Rob's point. So when you do ship, you want to make sure that it's perfect because you want to make sure that you are giving people what they want, what they've asked for. And so one thing that we've seen with crowdfunding is that you're able to, Sunny Boo from Misfit Shine put it really well, that he was able to get smarter faster. And so taking that and taking it at one point, what does that mean? That he was able, through his crowdfunding campaign, to figure out, he was able to see an initial revenue stream. He was able to see that maybe they priced it too low when they first went out on crowdfunding. There's this campaign called the Craves smartwatch. Through that campaign, they gave people the choice to be able to be like, what color do you want this in? Red, blue, yellow, red. Okay, I made up these colors, but you get the point. So what they were able to see was they were able to make smart assumptions about the ratios that they were eventually going to need to make the watch in. And so they're like, oh, black is the most popular by like 1,000,000%. Red, not as popular, but we had to make it because we said we were going to. And so just being able to, whatever tools you have at your disposal, crowdfunding, being able to connect with your users really quickly and authentically, that can help you to make more informed decisions. So at the point where you are shipping, that you can ensure that it's a product that is the best one to be in the marketplace.
So I think that's the next question is a good follow-up to what Kate just said. How does the result of a crowdfunding campaign influence your view on the projects? Because I've seen projects that are immensely successful, and then they go on to, of course, raise more rounds from investors. And there are some that just couldn't get past crowdfunding, but will also manage to get investors from angels or from VCs. How does that outcome of a crowdfunding campaign tell you anything about the product or at all?
Well, I'd start by saying this will be unsatisfying. So I'm going to start in an unsatisfying place, and I'll move to something which will be, I think, more satisfying. It depends. Okay, that's the unsatisfying beginning. What it depends on is a couple of things. One is your campaign successful? Okay, because the moment you do a campaign and it's not successful, you've proven that it won't work in the eyes of a lot of people that would invest. And by it being unsuccessful, that could be, hey, we're going for a $100,000 campaign. Look, we blew through our target. You know, you do 105,000, you do 200,000. If you're going for a fair amount of venture capital and you want to build a big scalable business, that's simply not impressive. It's not that interesting. It really needs to be, if you want to have a crowdfunding campaign be impressive, it has to be at least a few $1 million. If it's going to really catch the eye of professional world-class venture capital. It's got to be, say at a minimum, it have to be where Canary is, for example, and how they did. They built a great product, great team. They have a good core product. For those of you that aren't familiar with Canary, what they're doing is they're building a turnkey home security system where you just put in the device, plug it into the wall, and then you can connect with your smartphone. But that's the basic threshold. That's number one. Number two, the other issue with a crowdfunding campaign is that you're locked into a hardware product and you've told the world what you're going to build. So you have to really think through, is that mapped to the strategy that you want to have? Because the moment you tell the world what you're going to build, you have to deliver. People have an idea of what the time frame is going to be. You can get into development. If you're not far enough along, you find out, oh, you know what, I really can't build it. There are all sorts of challenges that has. What I think works particularly well if you're thinking about crowdfunding in the context of a company that can be big enough to be venture capital backed is a campaign that's about proving to a developer community that there's actually interest in the product. So I'll give you an example. An example of that is Ouya. Ouya is a perfect example where for this new gaming platform to work, they have to appeal to a broad landscape of developers to come in and actually write to their platform. And the way to do that is to show that there's huge demand that independent of the venture community, that they were able to raise $8 million, $9 million. That was a huge signal. So I think between that, or if you look at Pebble, Pebble's the same way. People you want to develop for their watch, at the same time, they see that there's a lot of demand, so you can help solve the chicken and egg problem that way. I think it works particularly well. Where I think that crowdfunding can also be good is if you have, candidly, you have no interest in venture capital financing, and you look at somebody like, I don't know, those of you that might know Corey Nanda, who created something called Clocky. And she's running a crowdfunding campaign right now for a new product she has called Toy Mail. And it's this little box you have, and you take out your iPhone app, and you talk into it, and then it goes through this little character that sits up on somebody's nightstand. It's a perfect crowdfunding campaign for somebody that isn't, doing something that might not be a good fit for venture capital. So that's why I'm saying it depends on your objectives, it depends on what you want to accomplish, and it's outside of just getting the money, and it's outside of just proving to an investor that there's a market.
I think there is no point in trying to prove to VCs that your work is. It's all about delivering on your products, it's not the goal to raise VC. It's just a means to an end to realize or to actually accelerate the development and control the market way faster. But it's not money that is going to help you deliver faster for the most part, actually maybe a distraction. So the point about crowdfunding is to be ready to go there. It's not about figuring things out later on. Because you are taking another risk in being public. It's actually to proving that there is a market, and then you have a lot of people entering the space, and that can be very costly if you cannot deliver within a few months. If you take 12 months to deliver, of course there will be competitors coming your way because you identified that there was something viable by having either a campaign worth a few millions and whatnot. For the rest, to answer the question, really, it's true that VCs at large will be only interested in campaigns that generate millions from the get-go. It doesn't prove, if you haven't raised millions, it doesn't prove much, or it shouldn't prove that there is no market for it, or but it says other weaknesses that you have in your team, in particular, probably in terms of marketing, if it's not the product itself, or maybe in terms of market. So if you raise less than $1 million, then there are a few flags. Investors work with flags, red flags or red flags, so that's one that you could fend off. Because it's time-based, 30 days. Actually, if you do a crowdfunding campaign, Kate will tell us more about that. But from our experience, you should put as many days as possible because there is, it's not as it used to be. There is something that didn't work in your campaign that VCs will look into. On the other hand, if you raise millions, then you prove that you're a team. There's probably a good product, but there is some market there. So you have lined up every step that the VC has in mind. On top of that, you are probably profitable, or at least on a monthly basis for sure. Or you'll be profitable for the next 6 months. So and you have a revenue rate which is in the millions. It's afterwards it's just adding fuel to the company. It's a lot easier for VCs to back this up. And if you look at the Kickstarter campaigns, and you look at Indiegogo's, it matches that pretty well. Most of startups that raised more than $1 million or $2 million have been venture funded by today. Sometimes it took quite a while, actually, 12 months later or whatever, but they all raised 2, 3, 4, 10 million sometimes afterwards. So that's very good.
It seems like
I'm actually going to take this in a little bit different direction. And so, while funding is really important, and I love that if we are here for funding for Internet of Things, for crowdfunding, recognizing that there are additional benefits outside of funding, and seeing how you can leverage that as well, and recognizing that that is a large portion of why you're doing this. I've talked to hundreds of campaign owners by now, And it's really clear that there are two different, so a primary, when you set out and you're like, I'm going to do a crowdfunding campaign, ask yourself, are you first doing it because you need money? Or are you first doing it because you want publicity, you want press, and you want, and doing awareness building advocacy, and user-generated content? So figuring out what your primary objective is, and then building a campaign towards that. So because the strategy is completely different. So for me, when I see a campaign that they set a lower goal, so they set a goal around like 20,000, or it's either very low or very high. It's either like 20,000 or 500,000. When I see that, it sends a signal that they are looking for money. And so their approach should be to get money. And so that means, so I'll give you some practical advice. So it means that you should first put effort into building your email campaign, or like email blast, because that is the highest conversion rate. Highest conversion rate is email, second highest is Twitter, third is Facebook. And so putting that energy into really building your email base is going to help you to raise money quickly. Number two, if you're looking for press, then likely you might be already venture backed. We have plenty of venture backed companies that have raised money on Indiegogo. And so what they're looking for is that awareness. They're looking for market validation. They're looking for user-generated content. They're looking for to collect that in-depth data, and also to, for example, Indiegogo, you can have contributions from, we've had contributions from 190 countries, and so it like really expands your reach. And so just when you go in, be really deliberate and ask yourself, what are we setting out to do? And then build a campaign towards that. And also to your point, we've seen that campaigns on average, their goal on day 37 of a 45-day campaign. So.
Brilliant. Actually, my follow-up question to you, you answered the first part. The second part is...
I read your mind.
Absolutely.
Love it.
You mentioned the two paths and two ways of, two goals when people launch a crowdfunding campaigns. And for each of those paths, what level should the project be? Should they actually have a prototype running? Should they? I've seen some of them on just like concept videos. What would you advise the people who are taking either one of those paths?
Totally. So that's a really important question, because so on Indiegogo you can get started at any point in the process. And I love that I have this example that I get to cite. It makes my job so much easier. But there is a campaign recently called N Case, N as in Nancy Case. And so back in January, they raised $8,000 out of a $2,000 goal to fund their prototype. And so they were very clear and they were very transparent about, this is where we are in the process. Take a risk on us, and like this is what we were hoping to do. Here where we are. And then they came back in July and they raised money for the actual production of the product. And then they went way over their goal at that point as well. And so what I would tell you is that they were able to raise a much lower amount by raising money for their prototype, because they weren't able. It is smarter, because to your point that you want to be able to fulfill what you say you're going to fulfill, and you learn so much in that period between like, hey, I'm putting my idea out there as a prototype, to like, this is what our finished product is going to be. And so you want to have as little divergence there as possible. So if you, for that January campaign, they wouldn't necessarily want to say like, hey, we're pre-order your product right now, you'll get it in a year. Because people, consumer confidence, like they want to support you, but not really want to support you that much for a large number if you're looking for like $500,000. I will say that there are anomalies, there may be opportunities, there may be situations where people are like, I just want to see this thing in the world. And I want to make it happen. You were at a prototype stage. This is so amazing that, and you're like pre-prototype. This is so amazing, let's make it happen. Just be sure, if in that case, if you are there, recognize that you want to make, so people contribute for one of three reasons. The person who's involved, the passion for what you're building and the pride in it, and the perk. So just make sure that your value proposition lines up with that, depending, and it's even more important when your ask is higher.
It seems like for both of those routes, it's really about being transparent to
True. Any route in the world for crowdfunding, be transparent, and the world responds. Well,
awesome.
Yeah. Or in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a life lesson.
Other.
The IoT startup landscape right now, what is your view on the landscape of the IoT startup landscape? Do you see any overhyped niches in the IoT startup space today?
Well, as we think about the Internet of Things landscape, we think about it a couple of ways at Shasta. I'd say one is we think about enterprise applications. So this is what would businesses use. So if you were to look at big industrial businesses like GE that has an effort there, and Cisco that has an effort there, and others, how they think about how might I make jet engines more reliable? How might I make refinery operations more reliable? That's one direction. Another direction is serving very specific consumer needs. And I think Nest is like the perfect prototypical example of this, where you go, we're going to make a better thermostat by building in lots and lots of sensors and artificial intelligence. And now we're going to build a better smoke detector. It's going to save lives because when it detects carbon monoxide, it'll talk to the thermostat and it'll turn it off. But these are very specific needs within the consumer space. So that's one direction. And then the other direction we look at is what I think of as more horizontal technologies. For us, the platforms just haven't been as interesting, so the idea of going to market with a platform can be very difficult. We've looked at companies in this space. We backed a company that had an okay outcome, but not a huge outcome. And what we found was that what you had to do with power budgets and the specific requirements of very specific verticals was so precise because of battery life and link budgets and requirements, data rates. You had to make all these trade-offs that a generic platform would be very difficult to modify into these different things. But what we found is that very specific enabling technologies have done pretty well. So a good example of this would be Ohana, which you had mentioned earlier. They build security software for the Internet of Things. And by focusing on very low power, high performance security that can fit in an embedded form factor, it lets them do all sorts of interesting things that you can't do by thinking about security in a way. So when we think about the landscape, we tend to think about it in that type of map. Now, I'll go ahead and I'll tackle very directly the question you asked, were there any areas that are overhyped right now? And there's an area where there's a lot of, I think, going to be a lot of blood in the water, and that's the wearable space. And there are some early entrants there that pioneered the category that I think will do well, like Fitbit. That team just completely pioneered the category. Nobody believed it would be as big as it's been. But it's a very challenging space for startups right now because consumers are a bit fatigued. They're intrigued, but they're fatigued. And you have giants like Samsung that have decided that they want to own the space. So you have Samsung, you have Google, you have Nike that are doing relatively unnatural things because they don't want to lose this weight. And when you go into a category where a major incumbent like Samsung has decided to take out 8 full-color ads in the New York Times, close to a week? It's like day after day after day. Everywhere in the world, that's very difficult to get above that noise as a startup, especially in an area where to get really unique innovation and go forward, like it's no secret that people are like, oh, I can do pulse oximetry better than somebody else, or oh, you know what, I have this great way to put in GPS. So to go into a category where you're fighting these huge incumbents that aren't just building product, but they have distribution advantages, and then they're pouring awareness money in, I think is challenging today. I think it'll be interesting. We continue to follow it, but I think of all the categories in the Internet of Things, it's probably the most difficult or challenging to start a company right now.
Just as full disclosure, I work in the wearable space, so I'll say, please don't say no. That's good insight.
Well, except for your company. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's funny because you know, one of the questions that we always have is, you know, China going to knock off your product, and
China's not bothering with wearables.
Actually, well, they're interested in it. But yeah, the reality is definitely that, you know, Google and whatnot are way more dangerous for startups than anything happening in China, because they also control the software, which is key to the IoT space. And so, yes, the wearable space is definitely heating up. I think there will be interesting things still happening, in particular when it comes down to mixing clothing and technology would be very interesting space to watch. But I see that on the IoT space in general, there hasn't been a clear winner at the very high platform level at the moment. A lot of people are into there, from Intel to Ludmin to GE to startups. Just everybody wants a piece of that, but nobody has really found the silver bullet at the moment. So they'll be on the wall here too. But it's still way open for better user experience, and that's why just thinking art user experience and differently may come up with the right way to connect devices and make it part of the entire experience. But I think another real hard layer for getting to win this space is distribution and actually having a way to have people experience a product that hasn't been sold today. Just trying to sell IoT devices in store is very challenging, and online is just about the same thing. Early adopters understand that somehow, maybe they just want to be part of it. But really to cross the chasm, IoT space is extremely hard, and getting to a full proposal that makes sense and that people will buy, in store or online even is still very challenging for many years. And finally, I think there is some kind of parallel. So I'd be curious about seeing the B2B side. Actually, kind of like there was a gold rush, on the B2C side of software, and then there was the B2B side of that started to take off through software as a service and other means. It would be interesting to compare also in the IoT space how consumer-minded entrepreneurs are going to try to solve B2B problems. It already happens in agriculture and whatnot, and it's extremely large area, and pretty exciting actually. So looking forward to see that.
Okay, anything to add about that?
I think so.
The next question is about, now that we talked about pitches and we actually talked about some of the landscapes in IoT, I'm sure that both from the crowdfunding side and also definitely from the VC side as well, you've seen a lot of project pitches, proposals, and crafting of the message around the value proposition. What do you see are the typical gaps in these pitches? When you see a crowdfunding campaign, or when you see somebody's pitches about the IoT products, do you see a pattern about, oh, okay, they should have really thought about that? That's something that's maybe people who have done software before, they typically miss it. Or is there something unique about IoT products, which is really an intersection between software and hardware? Is there any glaring miss that you would like to?
Well, I could comment on consumer-related companies and where I think the biggest thing is. And this is a bit of a pet peeve for me. There's this phrase that people have that they like to say that consumers are irrational. And I actually think that consumers are extremely rational. They make rational decisions. And if you're going into the consumer space for the consumer products and you think consumers are irrational, you shouldn't be doing it. You should not be doing that. You have to accept people as they are. You have to seek understanding. You can't be judgmental. And it is a fundamental mismatch that I've noticed a lot of people have, is they don't seek understanding. And they go and they say, well, we're going to educate. And the problem is education. It's not education. The product should be something that just you intuitively know what to do. You might get one instruction. Like you look at every generation of an Apple product, you get one instruction on what to do, right? It's like, oh, okay, to get out of anything, I push that button at the bottom. It's that type of thing. I could go on for a while, but it looks like you want to interrupt with a question here.
No, actually, I think you hit on a point that's quite prevalent in IoT space. Do you think?
Are we getting some water torture here?
Yes, it looks like it. Hopefully that will affect you. We're sitting right around lots of high power.
Or keep an eye on that one. Do you think it,
Darwin Awards.
do you think that it's
Come to the microphone again. All these different ways to die. Is that something you have to die in a spectacular way, right?
Why not do it on stage?
Yeah. All right.
Anyway.
Do you think it's something to do with the fact that IoT is still such an open space, even for consumers? Like, even for something that's so familiar as a wristband, they're still trying to figure it out. Like, what does it all mean? Do you think it's company also trying to address the fact that consumers don't know what they're looking for right now?
Well, I think one of the things that's interesting is it's actually entering the popular lexicon. Like it's the I think of it as the flyover state phenomenon, which is it something that if your plane had to make an emergency landing in the Midwest and you got out of the plane and you asked somebody about something, like would they have heard of it? Do they know what you're talking about? So a great example of this is this phrase Internet of Things. And I'd love to take a look at new technologies and new ideas and then put them into Google Trends. Has anybody in this room tried that with something with a phrase? Yeah? Try putting in Internet of Things. And what you'll find is that the search volume for it is up about 5x over the last 12 months and about 25x over the last 5 years. And I'm an engineer, so I don't just throw this around like a lot of investors throw this around. But it is truly on an exponential growth curve from a Google Trends point of view. You look at it, it's literally, it just keeps going and kicking up. So I wouldn't be surprised to be up another 5x. It's this trend that's going into the popular lexicon. So on one hand, people don't know what it means, but on the other hand, we've all grown up around fairy tales and storybooks and the idea of enchanted objects. We know what enchanted objects are. We know what an enchanted ring is. We know, like from fairy tales, these things. And now we have these objects where you can put these things called software in them. Well, software, what is it? It's a spell, right? I mean, so I think from a consumer point of view and storytelling and the idea of an object, it has a sense of identity and can tell a story and actually changes with time is something that's part of the fundamental human condition. So I actually think that people and consumers will start to understand what it means as we get to a point where the horsepower and the capabilities of these devices starts to grow as rapidly as Moore's law is allowed.
Does any other the other two speakers have something to add about the gaps and typical pitches in IoT?
Generally speaking, you guys are making amazing things happen. One thing that I've noticed and that I would love for you to avoid would be to approach crowdfunding as you would approach an investor. And so because recognizing that there's a different audience. Like an investor is looking for different things than what someone from a consumer side is. So essentially look at, and my camera, essentially look at crowdfunding as this is your piece of marketing collateral, this is you going out to the consumer base, and like there's consumer confidence at play. And so speak to them as consumers, as retail, as opposed to saying, and this is what I hear this so much, and I just want you to avoid it so much, of expressing also that there is heart in what you're doing, because I see so many campaigns that speak to it just as a consumer, and like if you're just going consumer, then go consumer, like own that. But if you're going to crowdfunding, you're doing that for a reason. Again, back to those 3 reasons of why people contribute to a crowdfunding campaign: because of the people that are involved, because of the passion and the pride of wanting to be involved with it, and because of the perks, what you can exchange for a contribution. And again, and just at the core of all of it, it's shared enthusiasm. It's not about like panhandling, it's not about asking for money, it's about having other people get so swept up and in wanting to be part of what you're creating in the world that they want to go on this ride with you and they want to take a risk with you. And so recognizing that that is where the value proposition is for me, Kate Drain, a person who has contributed to 74 Indiegogo campaigns in the last year. Like, I'm your consumer, so know that like I want to see your heart and I want to see why this matters to me. Which is, Rob, I bet Rob wants to see your heart too, but maybe just a different way. Oh, thank you.
But I think that also, to your point, Kate, it also speaks to what Rob just mentioned, is that in order for me to resonate with the message that you set out in the crowdfunding campaign, and you need to communicate that such that your target audience gets it. But you cannot assume that they're irrational. They just don't understand.
Yeah, it is.
You're a storyteller.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah, on my side, just a little more practical. Do your research about what it is that you're building in the competition landscape. It doesn't really, competition doesn't really matter once you're building something, getting into it, and you are way past research. But originally, what tends to happen is receiving a lot of pitches which are nothing really special. They look special to you, but there actually got a lot of people working on the same thing, or it's already in the market somewhere else. And so it's kind of disheartening to see. There is always a flavor of the months, or actually this period of 6 months, I guess, that comes back, and so same wearable IDs or same IoT IDs, or I'm controlling my light bulb through the smartphone, which you have to be much earlier and much ahead of the curve if you want to be backed by investors. We're talking about things that will be on the market in a year that will still be considered extremely early, or don't really make sense now. But because of all kinds of other factors that will be in your favor, and keep in mind that a big part of what you're doing is also being lucky and we put them into market. It's really about having an edge somewhere, and so it's about it's about your usual unfair advantage about what you're bringing to the table. But it's also about really knowing where things would be at a few years from now. So try to communicate a vision. I guess is
very nice. Speaking about being practical, I have a question about a very practical topic. So I've seen companies who are selling hardware and giving software away for free. That is a good one. You don't have to subscribe to it, at least not anymore. Versus some companies give hardware away and charge for the software. So on these two polarities, is there a happy medium that company can get some revenue from hardware and also has a revenue model behind the software? Have you seen anything that works, or is it just everything is still in these two polarities?
Yes, on my side, I guess giving the hardware for free is still relatively it's not niched because it's smartphones or routers or whatnot. But for a startup, the only case that is close to that is actually Monkey, or the router, Monkey something. There is a company selling, kind of a Dropbox across servers, what the name of it, and that was to give away the software for free and charge in the future for the hardware software, sorry, charge for the software. But it is extremely rare because most of the time people don't value things that are free. And for a startup, obviously, everything has cost, and that would be insane for anybody to give things that even if it's worth $5, it's extremely hard to recoup your sales. But there is the market seems to indicate that at some point things will go there. Maybe it's in the decade or so, where when things will, there will be a matter of commodity, the same that happened into the smartphone place. And at some point, someone's going to pull a trigger and try to give things for free. And so this is going to be very interesting from there. But until now, I think most of startups are at the phase where it's a mix of charging for the hardware and try to make margin on the software, or actually it's an extra. Because there are so many different business models that you can pull off. It really depends on the product. But you need to test them. It's too hard to you have to prove that there is people are willing to pay for the software in the first place. Or else you're also in a societal position where you are reducing your margins too low, and then there is no people are still pay for software is still a big extra, and your conversion rates are still going to be pretty low for a while. So it's a risky bet, but actually you can test many different business models over time and see what fits.
Oh, I have some thoughts. I think it's great to build a business selling connected hardware and giving software away for free. I feel very strongly about it. And I think that if you're delivering value, you can get paid for that. And in essence, what you're doing, if you're selling hardware at the right price, is you're selling a prepaid software service that goes along with it. But the product promise, this goes back to what is a consumer's expectation. You don't want to trick consumers. This is why when I hear wireless carriers talk about capturing consumers and signing up for these contracts, et cetera, everybody's kind of been trained. They know that somehow they're getting screwed. And this is what happens. It's like, okay, I'm going to sign up. Oh, they're auto-renewing for your benefit. No, they're not. They're doing it because they know that there's this breakage that happens where you're going to forget about them, right? Or maybe they let you know 3 days in advance, but you can't get through or something happens. So part of building a great hardware brand and something where people are going to buy hardware from you repeatedly is to build a great relationship with the consumer. And instead of thinking about it as a business model question, think about it as a way to delight the users of your product so that they come to love you. And in the age of social media, not just these campaigns, but in the age of social media where you buy a product, for the first time today with an Internet of Things, Internet-connected device, product gets better with time. I mean, just stop and think about that for a moment. Think about when you got your first Trio or when you got an old Dell computer. You got it, it was clean, it was great, and then 3 months later it got slower, and the batteries were dying, and like stuff went wrong, and like a year later it was like crap, right? But today it's more like a baseball glove. You get a baseball glove, you break it in, it gets better the longer you have it. And what's happening with a lot of these modern devices, and I'll go back and I'll use Nest as an example, but it's true with Sonos, it's true with GoPro, it's true with any of these things that connect to the internet. You get these regular software updates come out, and they get new features. They get better, and it's like 3 months later, it's a better product. It has a feature, it does things that it couldn't do before. Maybe it's unlocked sensors that were inside that device you didn't have before. So you end up building a relationship with your customers where the product is better 6 months down the road. It has a higher net promoter score than it did day one. So what ends up happening is your customers buy the product, they build this emotional connection, and then they get something they didn't expect before. So they're more likely to be an advocate for your product and talk about you in social media and take a picture of it and move it forward. So that is such an important thing. That's why I like the software is free model. So the company that has really mastered this is the company we all like to talk about, Apple, right? You go out and you buy an iPhone 5S, you know it's going to run iOS 8, you know it's going to run iOS 9. Chances are pretty good it won't run iOS 10. And what will happen is you'll have successive generations where there's this new software and it's great. And you're like, oh wow, my hardware has run out of power. So on one hand, you're feeling great because you can do this, but on the other hand, you have to upgrade it to the latest to be able to take advantage of these software features. So I'd encourage people as you think about this to think about what does it mean to build a product that gets better with time, and how does it actually help me become more profitable because my customers love me more, and they're going to advocate me to their friends, their colleagues, to others.
I'm just going to direct you to a resource that's smarter than I am. If you go to Upworker, if you guys have ever heard of Upworker, how many people have heard of Upworker? Amazing, right? So check it out. So on their blog, they just recently wrote a hardware business model post, and so I recommend checking that out and learning from it because it will educate you better than I can. But I think that it's a great resource, and especially if you're thinking about business models, that it could be something that could be helpful for you.
Fantastic. So one last question before we go to the audience. Three of you come from, I would say, different backgrounds. If you were to ask another person a question, who would you ask and what would you ask?
Then do they have to answer it?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, actually, you can ask the other two a question if you should.
No, and then, so I could just be like, oh, Rob, where do you get your shirts? And then it would be like, Cyril has to like ask me a question. No? And does everyone want to know where Rob is? I know, I'm dying to know. Yeah. No, I would wonder, wait, can I go first? I think someone take with Mike.
Okay, so Kate, what's your favorite Indiegogo project ever?
I'm going to give you a different answer than I always give you. Rob had asked me this question, this is the third time, and the first two times I gave him the same answer. So I'm going to pick a new one. This is actually, so I typically always pick campaigns that I've worked with, but this is not a campaign that I worked with, and it's not in technology, which is probably not as helpful for you, but, and it's scandalous for me to say this on stage, but like it's a campaign called Samantha's Vagina, which is, I know it's odd, I have a hard time sitting here and saying that, but it was a really beautiful story of a woman who like really fearlessly, again, connecting with the heart, connecting with the person. She put her story out there in this very fearless, authentic, transparent way, and asked for help to help her to do something that she wanted to get a sex change operation done. And so she went to the people, she raised over 2,000 more than 8, whatever that math is. That's someone else, you guys are all smart, figure it out for me, tweet it at me. That she's put out her story, and then she raised $10,000 on an $8,000 goal, and she just really, with heart, was able to communicate how much that meant to her, and I found it really inspiring both for me as a person who promotes people to be transparent and honest, and also from a person's perspective to know that there are people who, I don't know, just are so lovely and amazing. So that's my favorite.
All right, Rob. Can you tell how many crowdfunding campaigns you backed, and eventually why, and maybe both?
So I've backed a number. The most recent one that I backed,
Can we clarify? So I feel like there's two different ways to take this, like backed on a platform and then backed off of the platform.
On the platform.
Okay.
oh yeah, no, he's looking for a zinger. If you actually use the product. The most recent one that I backed that I really like is, I mentioned it before, I'm a huge fan of Corey Nanda. She comes out of the MIT Media Lab, and she built a product which actually about 3 times a year saves my life. Okay, it's called Clocky. Has anybody use Clocky? Anybody? Yeah, you've seen Clocky? Clocky is the most amazing alarm clock in the world. So it is this, I didn't pack it, but it was the inspiration for Red Matthew. It is this clock. It has 2 wheels on both sides, and you power it up, and it makes the most obnoxious noises you can imagine. And if you don't turn it off within about 10 seconds, it jumps off your nightstand, and it runs around your room, and it tries to hide under your bed where you can't get it. And it is the craziest, most amazing product. So I tend to work pretty late into the night. Like I'm usually up till like about midnight or 1, maybe 2. And then sometimes I have to get up early, so I have to get up at like 7, or maybe I have to get up for a flight. So I have these 3 alarms. So I have the iPhone alarm, and I hit snooze several times. And then I have like an old Timex watch. And then Clocky is waiting in reserve. It's the 3rd line of defense. So anyways, so I bought Clocky a while ago. I've had Clocky for a while. And as I started to do hardware more and more, I got to know Lori, who lives in New York, and she created this company. So our new company is called Toymail. And Toymail solves a problem that I have. And I went through the perks, and the perk that I really wanted was sold out. And like, and it was like literally 5 minutes after the last email came out, because there were only 5 of those perks. So then I went in and bought another one, and then I sent over an email and said, I think that would work. But anyways, that was the most recent one that I did is
Okay, so Cyril, I have a question for you. So since you are a prolific investor in hardware, I would imagine that people pitch you a lot. So is there some, like, what is the most memorable pitch, either bad or good? And then what was about it, like what got your attention?
Let's see. I guess one of the most interesting pitch I had was during the first accelerator program. A company called Nomiku that used to be called Lower Risk Kitchen. So Lisa and Abe. Abe is a plasma physicist, and Lisa was into restaurant business and whatnot. And so it was kind of an odd combination of people wanting to build a very complex piece of hardware, which is a sous vide machine, and so then we were taking classes for learning how to solve it with someone called Mitch Altman. That's someone you may know from Oxbridge. And later on went on to actually teach other people how to solder. So it was a pretty dedicated team to build a kit that we would use for sous vide. There was still a big gap between this and what they would go on to do in the future. And so yeah, very not usual interpreters. And at the same time, I was, despite being French, I was fairly ignorant about Soviet cuisine. We have a group of mentors who are helping me out. So I was asking a few of them about serving and the foodie movement in particular. So that was 2 years ago, which I realized I was a foodie myself. Obviously, it's the French. So just linking both was an interesting thought process, and it's actually if you should not educate your users that are agree on something that should be very straightforward. Do not hesitate to educate your potential investors because we don't know everything about everything, far from it. It's a great way to build your own credibility, and also investors will go back and think they're still doing research about stuff. Educate your VC.
Cool. So with that, I want to open the floor for audience questions. So we only have 2 mics, so I'm going to hand this mic down so everybody can hear you. If you can come up, that'd be great.
Hey, how's everyone doing?
Oh, it's good.
Okay. So my question actually is for you guys, also for you, sorry, but it's more of a game theoretic optimization conundrum. So let's say you have an idea that's much bigger than yourself, and you're trying, you have this great vision, but you know it requires a certain expertise here, a certain expertise there, data scientists, electrical engineers, artists, etc. How do you optimize how many people to bring into your initial team? Maybe you've seen with history of Indiegogo. What is the optimal team size? I don't know if that's a good question.
It's a great question. Just to start on that, I think it depends on the product, obviously, but the realities of every single hardware startup I've seen is that none of them is complete. If you really want to, have the full spectrum, ideally you will need to have, so the elsewhere electrical engineers, an electrical engineer on the team, a mechanical engineer, an industrial designer / product designer, a software which could be either firmware, web, back office, front office, iPhone, Android. You can go pretty far. So the ideal size, say, it should be 5. It's relatively not realistic to drag such a team in a full time in particular, since that's a lot of people to companies. That's what you're doing is pretty awesome. So you will definitely fall back into 2 to 3 people in general. What shows that you have to be pretty resourceful, and being resourceful is actually a great trait of being an entrepreneur. And so the best entrepreneurs that I work together are other people for free here and there. Sometimes outsource, sometimes sort of getting things done. But what's important is to keep your core competency in your team, making sure that you really masterize the product. And then so try to just fill the gap with other people around. What we do in sort of one of the interesting thing I think that's happening in Shenzhen and at Accelerator is that we realized that it's impossible to know everything. And so we have generally about 30 or 35 people inside of the room. Everybody's working on our products and software combo. So the answer to questions or knowledge or it's probably somewhere around here, and very close. So we really I think a big part of the program more I think about it comes from the PA, just doing things together and having that group moving forward and helping each other to provide feedback and provide help at several level is essential. So the group helps a lot.
Yeah, I wanted to give my answer again. It depends, and I'll tell you what it depends on. It depends on how highly integrated you want the product to be. So if you want it to be a highly integrated, low-cost product that's doing unique things, you're going to have to pull together more experts, kind of guided by somebody who's done it. At the same time, you can go and you can build something that may be all about the external design and style of that. You can do it with a smaller group of people using a bunch of off-the-shelf parts, like you work with Electric Imp, or you try to do something that's fully custom out of the gate. So if you're willing to use a lot of the off-the-shelf stuff, because you have a unique combination that appeals to a consumer need, you can get a certain price point, you can do it with a smaller group of people, and then in the next generation, you can work with this, more highly integrated. So and these are all the things that
Just from a crowdfunding perspective, so this is very smart for business, like making your business, but from a crowdfunding perspective, you want to make sure that you have your hustler, the person who is going to be the person yeah. So making sure that you have your hustler, the person who's going to be the one out hustling and making things happen, the person who is going to, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in your team, but finding these resources, like being a hustler and like pulling that in. The person to film your video, if you have a video, you raise on average 114% more money than a campaign that doesn't. The person to actually be your PR person, because again, you want to use this as a piece of marketing collateral. You want to, again, you are going to be out there for between 30 and 45 days, so make the most of those opportunities. And the person who is going to be managing the campaign, so you're going to be getting a ton of inbound. So you want to have somebody who is dedicated to helping to steward that process, because they're your community, they're the people who are so invested, so excited about what you're making, so you want to foster that and cultivate it as best as you can.
Was it smart to outsource your PR? And this sounds awfully very cool.
To quote Rob, it depends. You can do it, you can outsource it, and people do that. It all depends on how much capital you have, like how much money do you have, and what relations do you have, and what relations, again, can you hustle, and how much time you want to put into it. So it all.
I have an opinion.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Do it yourself.
Yeah.
On the PR thing,
Yeah.
get advice. Buy somebody this thing is called breakfast, lunch, alcohol, drinks, whatever, and find a few people to sit down and give you the guidelines. You can figure out basic press training online, but you're going to have to rehearse the story anyway. So this is the hustler you're referring to. That's why I was laughing, is because this is the person that does the storytelling. You're going to tell the story over and over again. You're going to tell the 30-second elevator pitch, the 15-second elevator pitch, and then the World Trade Center elevator pitch, right? Those are the pitches that you're going to have to become very good at, because it's not just a crowdfunding campaign, it's not just PR, but it's when you hire the sixth person beyond that team, et cetera, you have to pitch it over and over again. So PR is like whoever is running the company has to have. That's not an outsourced thing. The only reason that you start to outsource it is because you need more leverage from starting.
It's like, Yeah, you want it, again, going back to the whole heart, you want it to have your heart, you want it to tell your story. Like Sunny Boo from Misfit Shine, he was the one who did all of their outreach, like all of their communications, all of their PR, and you can tell, like it feels that way. Even like, see, I've said on many panels with Eric from Pebble, like he talks about how important it was for him to do their own, like for them to own their PR. And so if you can do it, if you have those skills, like again, hustle and like take people out to lunch, go do your thing, make it happen, because it has to have your heart. All right,
You can take them somewhere inexpensive.
The next question.
Hi, this question is more regarding funding. Are the terms that you usually see for the Internet of Things projects basically different from other areas, and if so, how?
When we invested in Nest, I can tell you, we were price takers. Yeah, I mean, it was a very short conversation with Tony Fidel, the founder. He's like, how do you like these terms? Would you like to invest? Yes. You know, I can tell you. I mean, it all depends on the idea. It doesn't matter what the sector is. It just comes down to quality of idea, quality of team. It's kind of that simple. It's not any different for the Internet of Things than anything else.
I say, you should not optimize so much for your valuation, but more for who you are working with all the time and finding the right fit. The valuation part. Other than that, it's just about the same thing. That's any other software, there's not much difference.
John, you want to?
I'm Eric Norton. I'm curious about using crowdfunding for the beta testing. We were told earlier that hardware has to be done well. It's got to be like mass when it comes down to it. I remember Matt Rogers saying they had several hundred units at one time. That's very expensive testing to iterate over and over. So how can we do that? Netscape is the first I've heard of this. I'm curious to hear your thoughts because Kickstarter is not a store.
Well, I think it depends on how highly integrated the product is. The example you mentioned that Matt was talking about is it's an incredibly highly integrated product. It has like 10 different sensors. It has very high tolerances. But if you're not quite as ambitious with your initial product and you're testing a couple of things, I don't care which hardware company you are, it's got to be damn close to perfect when it goes out, because once you dial up the production line and you've gone through DBT and EBT and it's starting to come back, it's got to be perfect. There's no other way you can do it, because you can't build a business if you have return rates coming back. So to a certain extent, what you're going to optimize is how complex and difficult is that first product to build relative to the money I have to get it perfect. So there are many different ways of getting to perfect. You can do a perfect layup and you can do a perfect three-pointer, right? It's the degree of difficulty of the dive. If you want to do like 2 twists and, or do you want to do just a simple straight swan dive? And for companies that are looking at what they're doing in hardware, and this is why I started with it has to be perfect. It does have to be perfect when you ship that product, and then everything else you do has to be dialed around having some level of perfection, whether it's a degree of difficulty that's like an 8 or a 9, or a degree of difficulty that's closer to 1. Does that answer your question, or was there kind of a second?
It's software that's easy to put something out and iterate. So my training at Toyota Motors was that you've got to iterate as much as possible. But
were you on the Prius team? Were you on the accelerator team?
That was an unfortunate. Yeah. No, I was on everything.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just being.
Yeah. There you go.
What I would say is that going back to this whole transparency and forthrightness, that so when this is what is going to happen, this has happened in the past historically, you'll put out your idea and you'll be like, yes, this is what we are going to do, this is what it's going to look like, this is what it's going to do, this is how it will act. and then you'll get feedback from people in the world who are like, hey, can this actually do this? Like, maybe you should think about this, or maybe this should, because again, it's this way to, like, putting a crowdfunding campaign, you're putting yourself out there to the world, and all of these people who are very engaged in Internet of Things are watching it to give you feedback and to give you opinions. And so, for better or worse, there's going to be this deluge of opinions. And so taking that feedback and taking that into account, that's an opportunity to iterate. However, I would encourage you, like, because you will likely receive feedback, be forthright in your updates and be forthright in your communications with the people who contributed. To say like, hey, thanks so much for all of your support and your amazing input. Like, based on your input, we have made these alterations, just because you want to set expectations so people aren't surprised at the end. They're like, this is not what I set out for. And like, even to give them the opportunity to be like, if this isn't what you wanted, like, we'll extend a refund. Or to say like, so even what we've seen happen, this is actually my favorite apology video was for Orapub. It was a brush that you put this, like, I still love it. It was right around this time, like, this might be my favorite campaign. I don't watch campaign videos, just as a note. It's just when I watched. And so it's for a dog, they lick this brush and then it cleans their teeth. But what happened was that they were like, we will deliver by Christmas of next year, or that year. When they got it to the factory messed up they missed a couple things, and so they weren't going to be able to deliver on time. I really say, like, look at Orapub apology video. And so they made apology video to be super transparent, to be like, this is where we are, super sorry, we're not going to fulfill on time. We know that we promised you this. We know that you have like families waiting for this underneath their Christmas tree. If you want to return, and I will give you, actually I will just because you're here, so you don't have to watch it, but that if you want to refund it, we'll refund you in full, and you can also punch me in the face. And so then they like have, like, you're able to like punch it in the face. And I, like, to this day, it's, again, I don't watch campaign videos, so when you make one, you're not making it for me. You're, like, make sure the pitch text speaks to me. But I really, just be transparent, set expectations, that's what's going to get you to the next level. Orapub, O-R-A-P-U-P. Orapub.
Last question.
Hi. Do you have any advice for selling to consumers hardware products that require installation? Nest is the obvious one, right? But maybe for somebody who doesn't have the name, the founder name, somebody gave them out any advice there.
Yeah, what type of installation are you thinking of? Things that could kill you?
No, well, on par with the Nest installation.
Yeah, I think it's very challenging. I'd say that's very, very challenging. And in general, especially with consumer products, anything that requires more than about 3 minutes of thought, is a huge barrier to entry and very difficult. So part of it, I'm going to use my phrase again, is it depends on what you're selling into. So if you think about things that you might, that require power, okay, that's like a level of training that's very, very high. If you think about things that are more about, you need to duct tape this to the wall, and you need to drill a hole and put a screw in or something like that, there's much less risk there. So I tend to think of the risk, like when you think about installation risk, on the, this is my personal way of thinking it, is on the risk scale, like the first, I mean, it's like, right, straight water we have, like, this is probably not that dangerous, this water here. But watching TV plugged into the wall at the bottom of your bathtub while it's full of water is probably a little riskier, right? You know, there's just these things, it's almost like a personal risk scale. Yeah, thank you. So, but what it comes back to is, think about your consumer and think about what is the hurdle for them to actually not just buy it, but to put it into practice. And if it takes the consumer more than a perceived, like 2 or 3 minutes, that's a huge barrier. And you can't be judgmental about it, you just have to accept that. And you can also think about how do you make it easier. when you look at the Nest installation process, for example, there's a little tab that says don't open the box until you check to see if it's compatible. And you take a photo and you send it to an email address, and they get back to you within 5 minutes after you pop the thermostat up, if you haven't disconnected the wires. Thinking through that whole experience of anything you're doing with the hardware Internet of Things product is the type of thing that helps you, because if somebody realizes that they don't have a compatible thermostat, if they haven't opened the box, it changes the way that people process returns. If it's an unopened box, it means that it can be saleable again easily. So thinking through each of these elements, not being judgmental of your consumer, but trying to understand your consumer and the steps that they're going through. The disappointment they're going to feel if they pop the thermostat off and then they find out within 5 minutes from whoever the company is that it's not going to work is very different than the thermostat. The disappointment they're going to feel if they get much deeper into this condition.
With that said, I'm going to close the panel because I think there's more pizza, more beer at the back, and I think a lot of the audience wants to person talk to person. So can we get a round of applause for the panel? And if you see any empty vessels, please help us out, keep the venue cleaned. And that's it. We have the venue till 9:15, so please hang out and come and talk to the speakers. Thank you so much.
Yes, very good. Yeah.